B. Collins.
Peter B. Collins, news and comment. It's Tuesday, April 24th, 2018. Last week, when Greg Palast visited the secret studio, we talked about the myth of the double voter. People registered in 2 states who were so eager to tip the balance that they'll vote in one place in the morning and another place in the afternoon. Now, I don't deny that this is possible, but it is largely a myth. And we were told by Trump repeatedly that he knows, you don't need any evidence or any proof, that millions of people voted twice. And he believes that most of those double voters voted for Hillary Clinton, producing the 3 million popular vote margin attributed to her after the 2016 election. And he also asserts that millions of people who are undocumented have voted in California. And he doesn't have an ounce of proof of that. Now, Greg Palast helped us understand Kris Kobach, who spells his first and last name with a K. And he, of course, is the Secretary of State of Kansas. And he is the voter fraud sleuth who Trump put in charge of a commission that has since been dismantled. And Palast says the easy way to remember is KKK, Kris Kobach of Kansas. So, Vice News reported, and I watched the video last evening, that Kris Kobach has actually found a double voter, a single double voter, a 20-year-old woman named Bailey McCoy, and she voted twice, once in Colorado and later in Kansas, and she voted for Trump both times. Now, it was interesting to see. This young woman is a rodeo rider, and so Vice caught scenes of her in action. They interview her and her mom, and she says this was an accident, that she went home to Colorado during the summer. Her mom had an absentee ballot. She filled it out, but the daughter didn't mail it in. Then she went back to school in Kansas, and with friends on Election Day, she went and she voted for Trump. And she called her mom, said, "Hey, Mom, I just voted for Trump." And Mom said, I mailed in your ballot, Bailey. So at that point, they realized that they had, broken the rules. And then a few months later, Kobach came calling. McCoy says that a detective from Kobach's office contacted her in August of 2017, and she was up front. She said, "Yeah, I voted twice." They met at a Starbucks in Garden City, Kansas, and the detective reassured her the charges would likely be dropped. But then in January of this year, McCoy learned from a reporter that Kobach had filed 2 felony charges against her, election perjury and voting more than once. The second charge carries a possible jail sentence of up to 13 months. And the Vice report shows that Kris Kobach is the only Secretary of State in the entire United States who has enforcement powers. Now, after kind of negative media attention, Kobach quietly settled the case and extracted a $500 fine from this 20-year-old woman who says she won't do it again. But keep in mind, I have argued this for years. The allegations of voter fraud are total bullshit. They are inconsequential. Certainly there is a limited amount of voter fraud, but we don't need to disenfranchise millions of voters by requiring photo IDs. These are voter suppression tactics dressed up as security measures. The real issue is election fraud, committed by the very people who preside over the process. They're the ones who have the means, the opportunity, and the motivation to flip elections, and I believe that they do. Well, there was a vote in the Senate Foreign Relations Committee yesterday, and while I don't believe there was any voter fraud, there were some frauds who voted, including the number one, Rand Paul, the junior senator from the Commonwealth of Kentucky, who had maintained from the start that he would not support Mike Pompeo transitioning from CIA director to Secretary of State. And listen to the bullshit that he summoned, because it's clear that his senior senator, Mitch McConnell, and the White House leaned heavily on Rand Paul. So here's his statement. After calling continuously for weeks for Pompeo to support Trump's belief that the Iraq war was a mistake and that it is time to leave Afghanistan, today I received confirmation that Director Pompeo agrees with President Trump. Trump believes that Iraq was a mistake, that regime change has destabilized the region, and we must end our involvement with Afghanistan. Having received assurances from Trump and Pompeo that he agrees with the president on these important issues, I have decided to support his nomination. This is such bullshit. And, of course, the enablers from the Democratic side, Manchin of West Virginia, Donnelly of Indiana, Heitkamp of North Dakota, they have shifted the margin so that, in fact, the machinations of the committee didn't really matter. The vote was destined to go to the floor in one way or another, and once it got there, it's the Democrats, along with the spineless Rand Paul, who will provide the margin. And there was even an interesting maneuver. We chalked this up to collegiality in the Senate, right? And the beautiful bipartisanship that... Sorry, I'm amusing myself just by saying that. What I'm driving at is that one of the pro-Pompeo votes was supposed to come from the Republican senator from Georgia, Johnny Isakson. But Johnny was away giving a eulogy at a funeral. Couldn't be present for the vote. And so Chris Coons, Democrat of Delaware, who didn't really want to vote against Pompeo, I saw the chemistry during the confirmation hearings, and Coons was just kissing him all over his butt. So Coons, in this demonstration of collegiality, he voted present, essentially so the committee vote would come out with a margin of 1 for Pompeo. And this was an opportunity where the Democrats could have rejected this nominee simply by standing together. But these craven jerks, who are more interested in maintaining their seat in the Senate than standing for any principle, for the good of the party, good of the nation, none of that matters. And these are the profiles in courage of the current generation of elected officials in this country. You may have heard of Alexander Kogan. He is a guy who had access to Facebook data. He ran one of those surveys that got people to disclose information, and more importantly, the people who disclosed information were tricked into giving approval so that Kogan could access the profiles and data collection on all the friends of the people who agreed to participate in these studies. Now, it gets a little complicated. Kogan was the leader of a group called Global Science Research, and they were essentially the engine that they put Cambridge Analytica on top of, like the body of a car. Cambridge Analytica isn't much of an entity. It was a funding stream from the Mercer family with Steve Bannon on the board. But the real work was done by GSR, Global Science Research. Now, the CEO of Cambridge Analytica was Alexander Nix. He's the guy we've seen on the videotapes bragging about how they can profile people with all the data they collected from Facebook and elsewhere. So Kogan gave an interview on 60 Minutes on Sunday night, and I found him pretty persuasive. He said, look, first he explained that there were 2 user agreements. One was between him and Facebook. He said, well, I never actually read that agreement. Does anybody? Then he turned around, and this is a little hypocritical. He said, well, look, everybody who opted into my survey agreed to my terms of use, which included that I could transfer or sell any data that I collected. And Facebook and its lawyers never complained about the user agreement that Kogan was using with the people who participated in his surveys. And this goes back several years, well before the 2016 election. And Facebook, which of course is this loving community where we all share cat pictures with our friends, is actually just a massive data collection system. But they don't want that really to be what the public thinks of them. And so what Kogan is telling us, and he seems truthful to me, is that Alexander Nix lied to Parliament over the company's use of Facebook data, and that Mark Zuckerberg lied to Congress when he blamed Kogan, singled him out, and Kogan says there were tens of thousands of people who were authorized by Facebook to run apps that collected data, and that he is the one who was mentioned by Mark Zuckerberg when he went on Capitol Hill. So I find all this fascinating. I have decided to continue using Facebook because I believe that all of that data can be collected by Google, by Comcast, which is my internet service provider, both here at the Secret Studio and at home, and by all the stuff that I just know is being collected every damn day. And yes, in some ways I've given up. I believe we're entitled to privacy, but we were seduced into sacrificing it for what? Free use of Facebook and Google? Today I'm releasing an in-depth interview to my subscribers at peterbcollins.com, at iTunes, TuneIn, Stitcher, Spreaker. And my guest is a columnist for the San Francisco Chronicle. His name is Otis R. Taylor, Jr., and he covers the East Bay area. And he's run a series of reports, I think 7 since last November, about the conditions of immigrants who are detained under an ICE contract at a county jail. It's called the West Contra Costa County Jail. And as it happens, it's less than 5 miles from where I'm sitting right now. And the conditions there are subpar, inhumane, and they violate the principles of the American system. And what Taylor has pointed out is that women are locked in cells that don't have plumbing for up to 23 hours a day. They're told when they need to relieve themselves, here's a red plastic bag. And that's not all. He reports an incident where a deputy at the jail had sex with 2 women in their cell, and he described it as consensual because, hey, I put some money on their accounts. But the women described it as rape. And there are other egregious conditions that the sheriff, David Livingston, says don't exist at that jail. Here's an excerpt from my conversation with columnist Otis R. Taylor, Jr.
I talked to inmates, and the inmates, I was so taken aback at how vocal they were, and especially in the presence of deputies telling me their stories. And I was so surprised because the deputies are saying, oh, none of this is going on. It's just one person, minimizing it. And then these women, there was a gaggle of them just telling me, they can't get health care. A woman says, I'm supposed to have surgery and it's been approved, but they won't take me to get surgery. Another woman tells me about the bags. Another woman tells me about the bags. And I'm asking the deputies, where is the disconnect? And that's why I'm still reporting this.
I invite you to listen to the full interview with Otis R. Taylor, Jr. It's available for subscribers today, as I mentioned, and some of those I'd like to mention too, including Andrew Harnack, George Reeves, Peter Hoffmeister in New York just took out a new subscription. Thank you, Peter. And Scott Bigelow renewed his annual subscription recently. I'm grateful to each and every one of you. I think you set a great example for others. And if you're one of the others, it's time for you to visit peterbcollins.com. Click on the menu tab, find Become a Subscriber. When you click on that, you land on the sign-up page, and in minutes you can set up a subscription to support my work that fits your budget. And if you're allergic to PayPal, my mailing address is Box 150, 660, San Rafael, California, 94915. That's Box 150, 660, San Rafael, 94915. Well, St. James Comey stopped in San Francisco last night on his national book tour. It was sold out well in advance. Almost 1,700 people came to hear the former FBI director, and he spoke without notes. He really didn't talk about Trump much until he got to questions that were submitted by the audience. And people came away, in many respects, at least based on a news story, feeling that he's an honest guy and that he has credibility. Well, James Risen, who used to work for the New York Times and now writes at The Intercept, he was a target of James Comey, and he hounded Risen for several years, related to the case of CIA whistleblower Jeffrey Sterling. Sterling went to jail based simply on the metadata of phone calls that he and Risen exchanged. They were never able to prove that Sterling gave classified information to Risen. And Risen was prepared to go to jail, rather than reveal his source or give any details. Now, this article by Risen is remarkable in that he doesn't mention any of that, and he doesn't display any personal animosity toward James Comey. But he picks up on elements in the book where Comey described Trump's anger about the leaks of transcripts of his phone calls with the leaders of Mexico and Australia. Trump also groused to Comey about leaks relating to a call from former National Security Michael Flynn and the Russians. And what we learn is that James Comey pandered to Trump about leakers, saying that, I tried to interject several times to agree with him about the leaks being terrible, but was unsuccessful. I then explained why leaks purporting to be about FBI intelligence operations were also terrible and a serious violation of law. I explained that the FBI gathers intelligence in part to equip the president to make decisions, and if people run around telling the press what we do, that ability will be compromised. I said I was eager to find leakers and would like to nail one to the door as a message. And I think that Risen is correct in pointing out this very aggressive streak on the part of James Comey. And as I said, I wish that he had included references to his own treatment by James Comey's FBI. But the part of the article that really stinks is where Risen writes, so far, the only two people who have actually been charged with leaking since Trump became president have not been accused of revealing anything directly related to Trump himself. They are Reality Winner, the former National Security Agency contractor in Georgia, and Terry J. Albury, a former FBI agent in Minneapolis. What do they have in common? They were both exposed after they leaked to The Intercept. Hope that's a lesson to any future leakers. There's also a good piece about Comey at The Intercept today, a byline I haven't seen before, Jean Theo-Harris. And she notes that in Comey's book, he goes at great length to describe his deep admiration for Martin Luther King, decries the FBI's treatment of him as a dark chapter in the Bureau's history. Shortly after he became director, he instructed the entire workforce of the FBI to read King's letter from a Birmingham jail. On his desk, he kept a copy of the letter authorizing the wall-to-wall surveillance of King as a reminder of this shameful history. But this is quite hypocritical. Comey presided over many of the same racialized tactics and assumptions in his tenure as FBI director, broadly targeting the Muslim American community, coercing informants, trafficking and racial profiling, surveilling Black Lives Matter and Standing Rock activists, and largely standing aside amid police violence and misconduct. As he hit the lecture circuit this week, feted by many across the political spectrum as the nation's conscience, we would do well to move beyond his claims of ethical leadership to his actual actions as director of the FBI. Now, I want to tell you before I start this next story that I'm very fond of Maxine Waters. She's a black congresswoman from L.A., a woman who I've talked with and enjoyed talking with many times. And I even marched with her once through South Central in the annual Martin Luther King Day parade. I also want to mention that Maxine Waters blurted out one of the most honest comments that an elected official has ever shared with me. I asked her about her vote in favor of a really bad piece of legislation that brought us the domestic terrorism law that doubles penalties for animal rights violations. And when I confronted her on that, she said, "You know what, Peter? I got that wrong. And I'm sorry about it." So, with that, I watched Chris Hayes on MSDNC last night as he interviewed Maxine Waters, and he played a clip from earlier, well, it was last year, it was about a year ago, and she had just come out of this was when Comey was still the FBI boss. She had come out of a secret intelligence briefing, and she was clearly upset. And she approached the microphones and she said, "I can't talk about what we just talked about in that secret meeting, but James Comey has no credibility." So, Chris Hayes played that clip. And Maxine laughed nervously a little bit and then said, "Well, I've tried to clarify that and to say, yes, coming out of that classified briefing, I said that and I certainly meant it. However, I think it is quite different when you take a look at Comey and his relationship to the president, what he said, what he's done. I believe him. I believe him. And so then was then, and now is now." And I'm sorry to say that Maxine is deeply infused with the Russiagate scandal. She's been a promoter of it. But I will offset that by saying that she is a full-throated proponent of impeaching Trump. And she told Chris Hayes she's not in alignment with Nancy Pelosi and the Democratic leadership on that matter. And yes, she thinks that Democrats across the country should run on impeaching Trump this year. But she is deferring to the leadership while still maintaining her posture. In the what are derided as the flyover states between the coasts, BuzzFeed reports that political operators on the Democratic side are not happy about the DNC conspiracy lawsuit that was filed last Friday, targeting Russia as a defendant in the suit. I mean, it is a joke. It truly is. And so BuzzFeed writes, the Democratic National Committee's drumbeat of messaging on Trump and his relationship with Russia is wearing thin with some Democrats in purple states, particularly in the Midwest. They quote David Betras, Democratic County Party Chair in Mahoning County, Ohio, that's Youngstown. "The DNC is doing a good job of winning New York and California. I'm not saying it's not important, but do they honestly think that people that we just laid off after another shift at the car plant in my home county give a shit about Russia when they don't have a frickin' job? Trump and Russia," Betras said, "is the only piece they've been doing, the Democrats, since 2016. Trump keeps talking about jobs in the economy, and we talk about Russia." Here's an unnamed consultant. "I'm going to be honest, I don't understand why they're doing it. My sense was it was a move meant to gin up the donor base, not our voters. But it's the biggest news they've made in a while." Another unnamed strategist. "The suit is politically unhelpful. I haven't seen a single piece of data that says voters want Democrats to relitigate 2016. The only ones who want to do this are Democratic activists who are already voting Democratic." And Claire McCaskill, the conservative senator from Missouri who's up for re-election this year, called the DNC's Russia suit a silly distraction. Interesting piece by Glenn Greenwald today exploring Joy Reid and her history of making homophobic comments, particularly online. And it's a lengthy piece. I've linked to it. But Greenwald opens by saying people do change, and that when Joy Reid apologized for her past homophobic comments in December of last year, that he accepted it and said, well, she's changed. But the outfit Mediaite, I guess it is, they went to the Wayback Machine, and they found Joy Reid's blog from 10 years ago. Before she joined MSDNC, Joy Reid was in the Obama administration, and she is a Democratic shill. I don't find her credible for the most part. Anyway, she has a history of saying that being straight is finding gay sex acts to be gross, that opposing Harriet Miyer's nomination to the Supreme Court by implying she was a closeted lesbian, making fun of the governor of Florida, by calling him Miss. She always refers to Lindsey Graham as Miss Lindsay. And some of this I don't find offensive, but some of it is. Now get this. According to Joy Reid, she discovered recently that she was the victim of hacking of the Wayback Machine. Now, I know a little bit about the Wayback Machine. It's based at the Internet Archive here in San Francisco. And you can go into the Wayback Machine, give it a web address and a date, and it'll pull up a snapshot, a screenshot of that website close to that date. Now, if you want to hack, say, a blog, an archived blog on the Wayback Machine, you would have to hack every snapshot that was taken over time. And so it is technically possible that somebody could go in and, re-edit blog posts from 10 years ago, but it'd be a hell of a lot of work. And what is the benefit? So Greenwald airs this out in some detail. I've linked to the article in the show file for this podcast. But toward the end, he notes, liberal news outlets and liberal journalists have steadfastly ignored the story almost completely. Well, I'm not one of them, Glenn. I'm also clearly not a fan of Joy Reid's. Well, we've got some crazy people in this world, and the man alleged to have gotten in a rental van and driven down the sidewalk in Toronto yesterday, killing 10 and injuring more. His name is Alec Manassian, age 25. He's described as a nerd from Toronto's Seneca College, a socially awkward tech nerd who was good with computers, did not appear to have violent tendencies or any strong religious political ties. But right before he hopped in the van and mowed people down, Alec Manassian went on Twitter. And some of this doesn't make sense to me. He wrote, Private Recruit Manassian, Infantry 00010, wishing to speak to Sergeant 4chan, please. Then he has the letter C, 232-49161. That could be a phone number. I don't know. The incel rebellion has already begun. We will overthrow all the Chads and Stacys. All hail the Supreme Gentleman Elliot Rodger. Now, I know this is code. Elliot Rodger was the guy at the University of California, Santa Barbara, who got in a car and killed 6 people. Shortly after he posted a video manifesto saying that he wanted to punish women for rejecting him. And the term for this, self-applied, is incel, which means involuntary celibate. It means that they're horn dogs who really believe that they're entitled to a sexual relationship with a woman, but they don't know how to engage in any kind of a relationship with a woman, and so I guess they get angry and hateful and blame women for their personal issues. That's the best I can decipher that one. Then we have the guy who went to the Waffle House in Nashville on Sunday, killed 4 people, wounded 4 others. There was a good Samaritan there who says he was only defending himself, who took the gun away and smacked him with a swinging door. And this suspect is Travis Reinking, age 29. Now, he has a history of bizarre behavior. Even at the Waffle House, he was wearing a jacket and no pants. I believe he was naked from the waist down. Now, last year, among other incidents that the media has dug up, he went to the White House with a weapon and was interdicted by the Secret Service. Following that, there was a decree in Illinois that required him to surrender his guns. He did, but the authorities gave his guns to his father, and his father, Jeffrey, gave the guns back to his son. And one of those was the AR-15 used at the Waffle House. Now, I've never been to a Waffle House, and I'm not an IHOP guy either, but at the Waffle House near Mobile, Alabama, 3 cops wrestled a black woman to the ground, and there's video of this They obscure the exposure of her breasts, but she was left topless by these cops. At one point, she was threatened that they would break her arm. There was a cop who had his hand around her neck, and another one was whipping out a taser. All of this was over a dispute about being asked to pay 50 cents for plastic utensils at the Waffle House. Now, like I said, I've never patronized a Waffle House. I don't know if you have to bring your own utensils. But I believe the fact that the woman was black and mouthy led to this incident, and I can't rationalize it in any way. Now, I'm not an expert on Armenia, but Prime Minister Serge Sargsyan, is that right, Sargsyan, resigned unexpectedly Monday. He had engineered a maneuver to remain in power. He'd been president for 10 years, and it looked like he was going to become president for life. But the massive anti-government protests that swelled in the streets made for a very unusual move. He actually stepped down. He said that the protest leader was right and I was wrong. The movement on the streets is against my rule. I'm complying with their demands. Wow. And finally today, Friday, is when Kim Jong-un will make a historic move. He is going to be the first North Korean leader to cross the 38th parallel and sit down on the South Korean side of the border for talks. And it's anybody's guess how this is going to turn out. And Trump is kind of feeding him. He's making complimentary tweets about little Kim, who he was so nasty at, with just a few months ago. But I do understand the caution that many people embrace. Here's a 73-year-old man in Seoul. The North Koreans are cheating again, putting up this show so they can buy time and ease sanctions, never intending to abandon their nuclear weapons. I would rather believe a woman who has given birth to a baby and still insists that she is a virgin than Kim Jong-un. Now, in this New York Times dispatch, they recap some of the recent developments that I'm aware of. Kim capped weeks of diplomacy with Saturday's announcement of an end to nuclear and long-range missile tests, shutting down of a nuclear test site, saying he will now focus on rebuilding the economy. And here's what's new to me. He earlier told American and South Korean envoys that his country was willing to give up nuclear arms if it received the right incentives. Now, one of the concerns that I've heard repeatedly is that Kim may give up missile testing and development of more nuclear weapons, but he won't give up the arsenal that he's developed so far. This indicates that sensibility is false. So I don't pretend to know what's going to happen, but I'm very interested, and I hope that it does lead to some sort of rapprochement. I'd love to see them work out all the deals so that Trump is left just kind of touching up his comb-over. Thanks for listening to my daily news and comment podcast. You're free to share it far and wide. We post it on YouTube. When you visit there, click on the subscribe button. There's no money involved.
Trails to you until we meet again. Happy trails to you. Keep smiling.